and welcome to episode 1 of Kakra and Coffee. I am Ruth. I will be your moderator for today's podcast. I hope everyone's having a very nice day. I am joined by 4 guests today. We have Nidhi, Maria, Meera, and Alan. Everyone say hi.
Hello.
Okay, so today we'll get right into it. Today we're going to be speaking about a very specific book. It's called Coming Out as Dalit by Yashica Dutt. So to give everyone a little bit of context, Yashica Dutt is a writer and freelance journalist. Yeah. She's written on many topics, including fashion, gender, identity, culture, etc., etc. You get the idea.
Yeah.
So we are going to be analyzing her work Coming Out as Dalit, which was a very, obviously, you can tell by the title that it's related to socio-cultural issues, the issue of lower class in society who are known as Dalits, in the Indian context more specifically. So we are going to be examining more specifically the main theme of the memory of silence and the concept of caste passing as such in the urban spaces of India. Basically, it's a lot to do with how memory reconstructs lived Dalit experience. Yeah. So that's the best way to put it, I guess. So yeah, I guess we could get right into it. I'm sure everyone has stuff that they want to say. So, Maria.
Yeah. Okay, so when we look at Yashica Dutt's childhood memories, one thing becomes clear, silence is not accidental at all. It is taught long before she fully understands caste. She learns how to manage it. Her family never sits her down and explains a rule book or anything. But the rules exist everywhere and poses warnings in what is left unsaid. She learns early that certain questions should not be answered directly. The certain details about her background should not be shared casually, and that safety often depends on discretion. This is important because it shows how caste operates psychologically, not just socially. The family is not simply hiding identity out of shame, They're trying to protect her, They know the risks of disclosure in a society where caste prejudice still exists, especially in supposedly modern spaces, right? So what looks like silence is actually a survival strategy shaped by past experiences of discrimination. So at the same time, this protection carries a cost, right? So when silence becomes a routine, it turns into an inherited behavior. The child internalizes caution before she even knows the history behind it. Fear is transmitted across generations, not through violence in that moment. But through memory of violence that came before. In that sense, the home becomes the first classroom where caste is learned, managed, and negotiated.
Like most other things. Because everything is taught through your family from at home. So you are essentially, when you get to a certain age, you're a culmination of the things you imbibe through your parents. Your home is the practice ground for the real match.
One another thing is what makes Dutt's memoir powerful is that she reconstructs these small childhood moments as an adult. Scenes that seemed ordinary then now appear charged with meaning. Through memory, she realizes that what she inherited was not just a family culture, but a method of navigating a caste-marked world. Silence in her story is not just emptiness per se, but it is a language that she was trained to speak. I
think it's funny because the idea that she was taught to be silent is a kid.
Exactly.
But it's so funny because she was taught to be silent about being a Dalit. So then being silent becomes part of being a Dalit.
Exactly.
So there's that. So then it becomes a part of it.
Exactly.
You think you're hiding being Dalit by being silent about it, but you are being Dalit by being silent about being Dalit.
Exactly.
So it becomes the same thing. So that's great. Does anyone else want to add to that?
Not really.
Okay. Cool. Well, maybe we should then take everyone to the key scene of the book, which kind of acts as the focal point for the rest of the book. So whoever wants to go for that.
Okay, so there is this specific scene in Coming Out as a Dalit. So Yashica Dutt decides to, publicly declare that, I'm a Dalit through a Facebook post, basically. And this scene is so important, for the
just little context to everyone, because this is what I had read in the book, whatever. She did this after a specific event. She was living in New York or something, if I'm not wrong, and there was an Indian student who killed himself because he couldn't take the pressure of the social life that he was living in, whatever. And she heard that, and it sparked something in her. So I think the idea of interpersonal experiences, right, and learning from someone else's experience in the same context, sparking you, is also a part of the experience of navigating through being in an isolated group of people. Sorry, go ahead.
So it's the fact that, as you mentioned earlier, an incident happened, and then she, we can say that she gets motivated to declare her identity, to claim her identity, to show her that I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not giving up on my identity. This is who I am. I'm going to declare it. And so before posting the certain post, Yashica hesitates a little bit. She types the words, deletes them, and then rewrites it multiple times. This hesitation, reflects the fear she has carried since childhood. Maria just explained, there are certain characteristics or behavioral patterns that you get from your family or your childhood memories and this is like again, projecting through the adult.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine if we have to post some small thing on Instagram, we type and rewrite the caption so many times. So imagine if you're coming out as your identity.
Yeah, the weight of the situation is so heavy that she's hesitating, and the fear of being judged, the fear of getting stereotyped, or professionally and socially getting marginalized. Her anxiety is not like very sudden. It did not just happen at that moment, but more like it happened basically like it's just a build up over time. So that's one thing. Like it's basically triggering a memory or like her orientation that has happened throughout her entire childhood, and this specific
which she didn't get to explore as a child.
Yeah, so she never realized this as a thing, and even as an adult, I don't think like when she was doing this Facebook thing, she realizes the heaviness of the situation, or one can say like. I don't think like she realizes it's because of her childhood memories that this is happening right now. And I think not in the same context, but a lot of people can relate to this. A lot of our behavioral patterns are coming from our childhood orientation and all that. And it will manifest in some kind of way. Yeah, so it's like, it makes sense. And it does happen. And especially in a Dalit context, Dalit narrative, it completely makes sense. So it just gives the
because that is especially it's a generational thing that's been carried on, and so I don't think you're right. I don't think she realized the weight of her silence as a child, because again, like we said, that's how she started it, so she didn't know any better. But when she grew older and sees someone else appear having to take his own life, such an extreme measure, and then I guess she understood, when you're exposed to the world outside, when you're exposed to with people with privileges that you don't have, then you realize how big of a deal it is that you didn't have it. So that's very fair.
That makes sense.
Alan makes a good point. Okay, cool. So that was obviously a very important part of it, the key scene. Meera, would you like to go next?
So he talked about her coming out as Dalit because she was silenced as a child. Now moving on to her school and classroom experiences as a Dalit, she was sort of silenced, or she was silent about her Dalit identity. So when we look at coming out as a Dalit, school becomes one of the most important sites of like memory, and it is like it's not an open discrimination or anything as such, but then like it's like the subtle tension that is there.
It would actually be easier to fight against if it was open discrimination. So you can openly call someone out and say you are discriminated. But if they do it subtly, I feel that's an element that oppressed people feel is shame, because they're shameful. They're like, what if I'm misreading it? That's why women are also afraid to come out about certain things when men harass them. It's the same kind of system. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So like this also sort of points out how caste is so silent. It acts so silently, but then again, that you could feel it. You know that you're being discriminated, but then you can't really come out or like sort of go against
call them out.
Yeah. So in this memoir, Yashica Datta recalls classroom discussions around reservation as such. So
very debated topic around the country.
Especially at this time.
Especially at this time. That could be a whole different podcast. But
these discussions are presented as like very intellectual debates, but then like they are sort of very personal to Yashica. And or anyone who sort of hides their Dalit identity. And then like her classmates used to question the legitimacy of this reservation policies, and they describe the quota students as like less deserving or like less meritorious.
It's an immediate isolation.
Right. Yeah. And then like even when these kind of comments are not directly directed towards her or directed towards her specifically, they had this like there is this atmosphere that is created around her where she is sort of discriminated very indirectly and very quietly in such a way that she cannot maybe really question it. And so here,
which is it's silent violence kind of where we
even in the documentary that we watched during our class, India Untouched, school was like such a big part of it. Like some Dalit students were made sweep the floor, not even sit behind that, sweep the floor, wash the toilets and that's very problematic in nature.
Of course.
Now the scary part is
you have to look for the upper caste students.
She's right. Scary part
is that it still happens. And now the school sort of teaches every Dalit that that merit is like very upper caste, and then like reservation or being a quota student is like something like
something to be ashamed of.
It's like a deficiency or something of that sort. And so the safest option here is being silent about like being a Dalit.
So what they do is they weaponize fear. Right? So instead of overt violence, they just operate in fear. So then they don't need to hurt you. They just need you to be afraid so that you don't hurt them. Which is the smartest way to discriminate someone. But that's a very good point. That's cool. So obviously we've spoken about the key scene, we've spoken about home, we've spoken about school, which are obviously all the main sites of a young person growing up, because what Dutt is doing is she's retracing her steps, right? She's going through memories. So then school, home, whatever. So then I guess we can come to urban spaces, urban peers. even past school in more urban spaces. So would anyone like to comment on that?
Yeah. So I think that Yashica that also like challenges the idea of caste and how we believe that in urban spaces, like among our urban peers or like elite spaces, like we sort of don't even discuss about caste in India.
Right.
Like we openly discuss about feminism, capitalism, and racism. Like I mean, it's not even like visible in our own country. Like racism in America. But we still don't discuss about caste, which is something which is very common, like experienced by our own people.
This is very funny because racism is a very interesting term, right? So racism is discrimination against race. In America, there's overt racism in terms of, black people are this, black people are that, or people from the global south or people from the east are like this. So that at least that's a little more, I'm not saying it's good, I'm just saying it's a little overt in that sense. The problem with India is Indians are discriminatory against Indians. Fair Indians are discriminatory against darker skinned Indians. You know, fair Indians who are Brahmins are discriminative against other Indians just because they are Dalit. It's not even a matter of race. So this idea of caste goes even deeper than a racial thing. You could be of the same race as such, but you are still treated as lower, higher.
So like even Yashica, like she went to St. Stephen's College, like, which is considered as one of the most elite education institutions. But still among their like the students, they openly debate on the topic of caste. Like, but it is like on the viewpoint of is reservation really necessary and how it affects the so-called upper caste. And that is what is discussed. And later, even when she worked in journalism, like among the media circles, where supposedly we are like should be openly talking about caste.
Right.
And then like her own peers, they even because they have lived in the city for all these years, and so they like consider caste as something which is invisible in the city. But I think it's just ignored at this point.
For sure, Because any conversation is only about reservation. Nobody talks about daily phenomenology, daily lived experience.
And the funny part is that even in a urban space where caste is technically speaking invisible, like the space itself is ran by the oppression of lower caste people.
Even that discourse is narrated by the upper caste.
Exactly. Like your basic necessities throughout your entire day is provided by the lower caste. The waste management sector or like whatever is a basic thing that's required for our daily life. It is basically ran by the oppression of lower caste people. And the funny part is that all this will happen, and then there will be some people who will say, reservation is not required, there is no caste, and at the same time when they are speaking it, they still have casteism in their mind. That's the most funny part.
That's very true. So then urban spaces are apparently also not an escape from this, and one would think they are, because one would think that urban spaces are filled with educated people. So you would have the education and the good mind to not do it, right? So, but then that doesn't make sense because we already saw that in an educational institution itself there is casteism. But so then I think we can bring the conversation to how education can be an escape. Right? Because if in educational spaces themselves there is casteism, educated people in urban spaces themselves are being casteist, how can we then try and use education as the way to evade casteism?
So I think that Yashica like also talks about how her grandparents who belong to the Dalit community, they sort of mobilize themselves through education by entering civil services. And I think we should also see that it was possible because of reservation. And yet I think how reservation is heavily stigmatized in these elite circles. And she also recalls like the moment how she felt when she had to like sort of fill the SC/ST category throughout all the applications throughout her life. So I think this society frames reservation as something which is undeserved, but I think she is internalizing some of that shame throughout her life. And in school textbook also, like we are talking about Ambedkar and everything, but still like he talks about like anti-caste politics, but these same politics are like being ignored by the elite classes. And I also think like to fit into these elite institutions, she avoids using her own political politics and her theories. And I think that sort of shows that how caste is still like sort of very visible within the mainstream spaces as such.
That's true. Fair. I think another important thing that she talks about in the book is the concept of caste passing as an everyday practice. Right? So what would we
so one thing is moving from childhood into adulthood. Silence as a thing evolves into something more active, like caste passing. Exactly what we're talking about right now. In the memoir, that mentions that passing is not presented as a dramatic one-time act. It is an everyday practice. So it shows up in the way she speaks, the way she introduces herself, the details she chooses to reveal or conceal. In elite English-speaking spaces that claim to be modern and progressive, caste is often treated as if it doesn't exist, But that denial creates pressure on those who know it does. To pass successfully, she has to constantly monitor herself. Even ordinary things become loaded with meaning. Her surname, her accent, where is she from, what she says about her family. her own body becomes something she has to manage carefully. So as it might betray her, this is not simply social adjustment. It is emotional labor. She must regulate her actions, hide discomfort when casteist remarks are made, and remain composed so that suspicion is never triggered, Yeah. So that's
it.
Yeah.
That's right. Nidhi also mentioned Ambedkarite ideology and stuff. So another part of the book is she has this rediscovery of Ambedkarite ideology because, as we all know, Ambedkar was a huge torchbearer for the Dalit cause. So I think it's also important very much to talk about that if you're thinking about that work.
So towards the later part of the memoir, so we see this very powerful kind of a transformation. So Yashica Dutt reconnects with Ambedkar's writing and their Dalit political history as such. So this moment is sort of like a turning point on how she sort of understands her past or her identity as a Dalit and stuff. So her earlier memories were sort of filled with shame and everything, or maybe she was silenced as such about being a Dalit. And then she sort of believed that her silence is very necessary to succeed, maybe. And
which Ambedkar was the exact opposite.
Exactly. And through reading Ambedkar and engaging with the Dalit discourse as such, she begins to reinterpret those memories.
Right.
She realizes that what she experienced was not personal inadequacy.
Right.
It was a structural caste oppression as such. So this rediscovery shifts the memory to something very empowering.
Right. Which I think, we can also talk about how then that would bring us to understand this memoir not just as a memory but as a counter memory. Right?
Yeah.
And understanding how she's trying to rewrite that environment, right?
Yeah, so about that, the idea of counter memory. So she is trying to, challenge the Savarna narrators that was written or told about Dalits. The point is that Dalit did not have the option to narrate their own story.
Right.
And this is like a counter memory where she's challenging the ideas about Dalit with her own story.
Right.
And she's trying to rediscover her experience, which were basically erased or minimized.
Right.
Her fear, shame, or whatever emotions and challenges that she was going through, she's trying to rediscover through her.
And sort of reclaim.
Yeah, she's trying to claim it. It's her memory.
Right.
And the point is that there was a certain situation in her childhood, and which, when she grew, there was a certain situation. The act of forgetting itself is a memory.
Right.
She has to curate her memory so that she is successful or she is a normal person, in the normal sense or whatever. In the traditional sense. So the act of forgetting itself, I think Vidya ma'am also talked about this.
Right.
The act of forgetting itself becomes a memory.
Right.
And then it is erasing or minimizing your experiences.
Right.
So that's one thing, counter.
Yeah.
It's an important point.
Right.
So, that's pretty much all the important stuff, I guess. But one, obviously, that reading narratives like this begs the question of what implication would these kind of books have, like this memoir would have, because obviously it's a cultural thing that's very important, and she's done it not as fiction but as true reality, and she wants to make a change. So then how would books like this, narratives like this, have a socio-political implication?
Basically how I see it is a archive of Dalit urban experience.
Right.
It is part of the archive. By writing her personal story, she is basically contributing to the Dalit, the collective Dalit experiences that's being explained or narrated, and by that she is not just giving herself identity or she's not giving herself identity, but also to the entire Dalit community. So that's also a thing.
Yeah, it's really funny that every time someone from a marginalized community or someone who's speaking out about oppression speaks from their personal experiences, they end up inherently becoming a representative for the entire
community.
Which I think there's also a little bit politics there, right? Because I think it's also a bit of a burden. So if I come out and I speak about a very specific experience that I had, even if, let's say as a woman, because I'm not from an oppressed community, I can't speak as a Dalit, but let's say as a woman, if I come out and speak about, let's say, one harassment occurrence in my life, inherently I become a representative for all women who've ever been harassed, which I think is not entirely fair also, because you start to bear the burden of a collective experience, a collective representation, which has a lot higher implications than you wanted for yourself. So I think it's very interesting to investigate people's personal experience separated from a collective maybe, but the intersection is very important. But it's also important not to put someone on a pedestal that they didn't ask for.
Right.
I think that's also very important. So that's great. I think we all have some very interesting ideas about this. It's a very interesting memoir, obviously, for anyone who wants to learn more about caste and the whole Dalit movement and the Dalit cause, this would be a great book to start with. So essentially the main theme is the memory of silence and how by speaking out about her personal experience, she is trying to reclaim those memories, reconstruct the idea of who she is, and create this concept of a counter memory to counter her memory of it and be able to reclaim it as her own. So I guess that concludes the podcast. This is episode 1 of Part-Time Coffee. We start off with a very heavy topic, which is great. But okay, thank you so much to everyone who listens. Maybe we will be back with episode 2. We don't know. Okay, everyone say bye.
Bye.